I thought it was a scarecrow, just a dark shape lost in the middle of the sunflower field standing too still too long. But then it turned its head and brown eyes met mine, not wide with fear, not begging, just tired, like something that had been waiting too long to keep hoping. I stepped off the path, boots crunching through the dry August stalks, the air thick with heat in pollen wecha. Summers are cruel like that, hot, endless, buzzing with life that sometimes feels too loud. But in that patch of silence under a sky as wide as sorrow stood the quietest soul I'd ever seen. A puppy, black as night, 6 or 7 months old. Maybe German Shepherd by the shape of him. Not a speck of color on him except for a bright orange collar, faded by sun and dust, with no tag. No name. Nothing but a loop of plastic and the weight of questions. He didn't move when I got close. Didn't flinch when I knelt, just stood there, still half swallowed by stalks taller than me, like the field had tried to hide him but couldn't quite bear to. His ribs showed just a little through his coat. His paws were caked with cracked dirt, but his eyes, they didn't leave mine. Not once. I didn't reach out, just sat beside him, heart pounding in rhythm with the sickest. After a minute, I said, "You've been here long, boy." Nothing someone drop you off or you get lost. Still nothing but his ears flicked once, and he shifted his weight just enough that the sun caught the gloss of his coat. It looked almost blue in the light. Beautiful, haunted. I stood up slow, not wanting to spook him. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm heading back to the truck. If you want, you can follow." And then I turned, walked the same way I came, every step heavier than the last, like the ground didn't want me to leave him. I didn't look back until I reached the fence line, and when I did, my throat caught. He was there, 10 feet behind, not running, just walking like a shadow that had decided to take form again. He followed me all the way to the truck, didn't try to jump in, just stood at the passenger door and looked at me, waiting, giving me the choice. "Well, I can't leave you now," I whispered. He jumped in the moment the door opened, curled up in the seat like he'd done it 1,000 times. Like this wasn't his first ride, just the first one that didn't end in a field of forgetting. On the drive home, I kept glancing at him. He didn't sleep, didn't pant, just sat looking out the window like he was memorizing every second in case it got taken away again. Back at the farmhouse, he stepped out, slow, cautious, sniffed the porch, then the grass, then me. When I reached to unzip the collar, he shrank just a bit. Not a lot, but enough to say someone had grabbed that spot too hard. Once I let it be that night, he slept outside by the door. I left it open a crack, not because I was testing him, but because I needed him to know the door wasn't going to shut again. And from my bedroom, I heard him shift once. Then sigh, not like he was giving up, but like he was letting go. My name is Margaret Haynes. I've lived out here in Sedgwick County, just north of Wichita, for over 30 years. The farmhouse isn't much, but it holds together. My late husband, Tom, built the porch with his own hands, and the fence posts still have his hammer marks since he passed. It's mostly just me and the wind, and now this black shadow of a dog who showed up in the sunflowers and decided not to leave. I didn't name him right away. Naming things makes them real, makes them yours, and I wasn't sure I was ready to claim anything. Again, not after so much of what I'd loved had been taken piece by piece, but the puppy didn't seem to mind not having a name. He stayed close, but always just far enough that I had to earn the space between us the first few days. He didn't eat unless I walked away, wouldn't touch the blanket I laid out, slept in the dirt beneath the bench, curled tight as if trying to disappear into the earth. And then on the fourth morning, I found him in the garden. I was out picking tomatoes, talking to myself like usual, when I turned around, and there he was, sitting among the marigolds, like he'd been growing there all along. His head tilted, one ear flopped just slightly forward, watching me, listening. "You think those tomatoes are yours, huh?" I teased. He didn't blink. I tossed him a slice. He caught it midair. That was the first moment I saw a flicker of something in him. Not playfulness, no, not yet, but willingness, the kind of spark that says, maybe this isn't the end after all. That afternoon, I sat on the steps and read out loud, an old habit from when my granddaughter was small. He lay near the porch, chin on paws, not asleep, but not alert either. Somewhere in the middle, like he was resting inside a question. I told him stories about the sunflowers, about how Tom used to say they always face the light. no matter how dark the day before had been about how I used to believe that too. I don't know where you came from, I said softly, but if those flowers saw something in you, maybe I should too. He blinked slow, a dog's version of agreement. That night I opened the door wide, left a second blanket next to the hearth, and in the morning, when I came down to make coffee, I found him there, not curled in the corner, not hidden. He was right in the middle of the rug asleep, breathing deep, and beside him, like it had been placed with care, was something I hadn't noticed before. A piece of rope frayed at both ends, dirty, chewed, maybe a toy, maybe a memory. Maybe a reminder that even in fields of forgetting, something always remains. I picked it up and held it for a moment. Then I set it on the mantel right beside Tom's old photo, because I knew even then that this dog, this ghost of a shadow, wasn't going to leave again. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't want him to. The next few days settled into something close to rhythm. He followed me out to the chicken coop in the mornings, watched the hens with quiet curiosity, never chasing, never barking, just observing, like he was trying to understand the rules before daring to play the game. I started calling him boy just out of habit. Come on, boy, I'd say time for feeding, or let's go, boy. Storms rolling in, he never disobeyed, but he never really responded either. Not until one afternoon when I was out stacking kindling by the shed and nearly dropped a bundle on my foot, I muttered something unrepeatable, and from behind me came a single bark, sharp, quick, like a laugh. I turned. He stood there, tongue-ling tail slowly wagging, and I swear if a dog could grin, that was it. You think that's funny, do you? I asked, brushing my hands on my jeans. Another bark. Then he trotted over and nosed the dropped branch, like he wanted to help. I bent down to meet him face to face. If you're going to laugh at me, you better have a name. He tilted his head, those deep brown eyes locking with mine. Rowan, I said. The word slipped out before I had a chance to think about it. It means strength, protection, and rebirth. He didn't move, didn't bark, but something settled in the air between us, and from that moment on, he was Rowan. Later that week, I drove into town for supplies, left Rowan home just for a couple hours. When I got back, I found the gate wide open. My chest caved in before I even parked the truck. I called out his name over and over, no sound, no movement. I ran through the back field, heart hammering, lungs burning. Then I saw him standing at the edge of the sunflower field again, exactly where I'd found him. He wasn't running, just staring, still as stone, as if pulled back to the memory of where it all began. Rowan, I yelled, tears choking my voice. Please don't go back there. He turned his head, slow, looked at me. And then he came, walked all the way back to me, one step at a time, until his nose was pressed against my palm. I dropped to my knees, wrapped my arms around him, and whispered, "You're not lost anymore. You're home." That night he lay by the fire, paused, twitching. As he dreamed, I watched the flames flicker and thought about how grief moves through people, how it settles in the bones. But maybe dogs are different. Maybe they carry it for us. Maybe that's how they heal the next morning. I found something strange, a torn plastic wrapper stuck in the corner of the porch, like it had been dropped there by mistake, a brand I didn't use. Not mine. Someone had been near, maybe even come looking. But if they had, they hadn't called his name. I looked at Rowan, who was chasing butterflies in the garden, like a puppy who'd never known fear. And I knew right then I wasn't going to give him back to silence. Whoever let him go didn't see what he was. But I did that weekend. The wind shifted, cooler, drier, the kind of air that carries the first whisper of autumn. Even though the fields still blaze gold and the sky holds on to summer like a secret, I pulled the quilts out of the cedar chest, set out the cinnamon-scented candles, and waited. Because my granddaughter was coming. Her name is Ellie, 10 years old, going on 30, all freckles and wild hair, with eyes that hold storms and sunshine. In the same breath, her parents had asked if she could stay a few weeks, just until things settled down. They said I didn't ask questions. I knew that tone. I'd lived it once when Ellie stepped out of the car. She was quiet, too quiet, her backpack slung low, sleeves pulled over her hands. Her mom kissed her cheek. Her dad ruffled her hair, and then they drove off like they couldn't get away fast enough. I stood on the porch, Rowan beside me. She looked up at us, said nothing, then walked straight past and into the house. I glanced at Rowan. He didn't move inside. She dropped her bag by the stairs and disappeared into the guest room. I gave her space set out. Dinner fried chicken, mashed potatoes, corn on the cob. The kind of food that fills more than just your stomach. She didn't touch a bite, but Rowan did. He waited by the door until I gave him the nod, then padded softly down the hallway. I heard the creak of the floorboards, then silence, then the tiniest rustle blankets shifting. Maybe after a minute he came back and lay by the kitchen table quiet like always, but his eyes were different, watching, waiting that night. As I turned out the lights, I found them curled up together on the guest bed, Ellie's arm draped across his back, Rowan's head tucked beneath her chin, like he belonged there, like he always had. I didn't disturb them. The next morning she followed me into the kitchen barefoot, and blinking, she poured herself a glass of milk, sat down at the table and said, "He doesn't talk much, does he?" "No," I said gently. "But he listens real well." She nodded. "I like that." They became inseparable. Rowan followed her like a shadow to the barn, to the fields, even to the little pond where she skipped stones and told him stories. I pretended not to overhear stories about school, about feeling invisible, about parents who yell in whispers behind closed doors. He never looked away. Sometimes I think the reason dogs don't talk is because their silence speaks louder. They don't try to fix us, they just sit in the broken with us until the pieces feel safe enough to breathe again. One afternoon, Ellie brought out a length of twine and a silver tag she'd found in the junk drawer, sat cross-legged on the porch, and etched it with a penknife. When she was done, she called Rowan over, clipped the makeshift tag to his collar, and held it up for me to see. It said, "If found, I belong to Ellie and Grandma." I felt something break in the quietest way possible, the kind of break that lets light in later. I found the tag hanging crooked and the twine starting to fray, but I didn't fix it because it was perfect. One weekend, Ellie started smiling again. Not the polite kind she wore at dinner tables back home, but real ones, wild and crooked and full of something fierce and hopeful. The kind of smile that made me forget for a moment how heavy the world could be. And I knew without asking that Rowan had something to do with that. They invented a game with no name. Ellie would run through the sunflower rows, dodging stalks and laughing, while Rowan chased behind, never barking, never too close, like he knew exactly how much space she needed to feel free. Sometimes he'd vanish completely, only to leap out from behind a bush with his tongue lolling and tail wagging like a banner. And every time she screamed, it was the kind that shakes off the dust sadness leaves behind. One morning I watched them from the porch. Ellie knelt beside Rowan, carefully tying a daisy chain around his collar. He sat so still, eyes half closed in the sunlight, letting her decorate him like a prince. She whispered something into his ear, and he pawed at the ground as if answering. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The way she touched him, the way he leaned into her, there was trust there, and healing, the kind you don't get from therapy or books or even time, the kind that comes from being seen, truly seen, and loved anyway. Later that day, a thunderstorm rolled in the sky, turned green-gray, and the wind picked up fast. Ellie hates storms, always has her. Mama once told me she hides in closets when the thunder starts, but this time she didn't hide. She sat on the rug in front of the firearms around Rowan, his head resting in her lap every time the thunder cracked. She flinched, but he didn't, not once, and that steadiness, his silence, his calm, it anchored her like nothing else could. I sat behind them, knitting half-heartedly, pretending not to watch when the lightning lit up the windows and the wind howled like something ancient. Ellie pressed her forehead to Rowan and said, "You're not scared either, huh?" He blinked. She nodded. "Okay, then I won't be too that night." She wrote in her notebook, the little one with the cracked leather cover she never let anyone read. She left it open on the table by accident. I didn't mean to peek, but one line caught my eye before I could look away. It said, "Rowan is the only one who understands me without asking me to explain." I closed the notebook gently, went into the kitchen and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I realized something: he hadn't just saved her. She was saving him too. That Sunday I took them both to the farmer's market in town. I'd promised Ellie we could get fresh peaches and maybe one of those sugar-dusted funnel cakes she loved as a little girl. She brushed Rowan before we left, took her time with it too. Like she wanted him to look proud, and he did. His black coat gleamed like polished obsidian, and the daisy chain had been replaced with a new tag one shaped. Like a sunflower, she'd saved up her allowance to have it engraved. Rowan home is wherever he's loved. We didn't make it 10 steps past the first stall before people started to notice that your dog, a man asked tipping his hat, fine-looking shepherd, yours said, another looks familiar, real familiar. Rowan stayed close pressed against Ellie's side, ears up but not alert, like he was ready for whatever came next. I could see the questions forming in some folks' eyes, wondering if he was one of the dogs that had gone missing this past year. There had been whispers about it, strays disappearing a few, found later in bad shape. But no one had ever come forward. No one claimed responsibility, and no one claimed Rowan either. That should have scared me, but it didn't. Because I saw the way he looked at Ellie when she offered him a bite of her peach, like she hung the moon just for him, and in return she looked at him like he was the only steady ground she had left. We sat under a shade tent, eating funnel cake, the powdered sugar flying every time Ellie laughed. Rowan lay at her feet, head resting on her sandal. A little girl came over and asked if she could pet him, and Ellie hesitated, but Rowan didn't. He stood, wagged his tail once, then lowered himself gently so the toddler could touch his back. Her giggles rang out like wind chimes later as we walked back to the truck. Someone asked, "What shelter did you adopt him from?" I paused, then answered, "The one life puts you in when it wants to test your heart." They laughed, not knowing how true it was. That night, Ellie drew a picture of the three of us sitting on the porch, the sunflowers swaying behind us. Rowan in the middle with a crown of daisies and the biggest smile only she could imagine. She hung it on the fridge next to Tom's old fishing photo. When I tucked her in, she said, "Grandma, I think he knows. Knows what sugar that he was supposed to find us." I sat down on the edge of the bed, brushed her hair back from her forehead, and whispered, "Maybe we were supposed to find each other." Rowan curled up at the foot of the bed, letting out a sigh so deep it filled the whole room. Outside, the wind moved gently through the stalks, and in that quiet, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not for signs, not for healing, because healing was already here, and it had 4 legs, soft ears, and a soul deeper than the Kansas sky. The next morning, the air smelled different, cooler, like something had shifted. The first leaves were beginning to turn, and the sky wore that soft golden haze that only late summer carries. I made pancakes while Ellie fed Rowan his kibble, with a few blueberries slipped in. "He likes the sweet ones," she said he did. He picked around the bowl for them, like a child searching for treasure after breakfast. We decided to take the long walk through the back pasture where the sunflowers stretched wild and untrimmed. I hadn't walked that far in years, but Ellie said Rowan needed an adventure, and maybe I did too. Rowan led the way, bounding through the high grasses like a shadow stitched to sunlight. His tail cut the air like a flag, and Ellie chased behind him, laughing. I trailed slower, my knees creaking, but my heart light. They disappeared over the hilltop ahead, and for a second I panicked. I called out, "Ellie, no answer!" I picked up my pace, breath shallow, heart rising. Then as I crested the slope, I saw them. She was sitting in the middle of the clearing, arms wrapped around Rowan's sunflowers, swaying all around them like guardians. He was pressed to her chest, not moving. She looked up at me and said, "He was shaking? Grandma, just shaking all over." I knelt beside them, placing a hand on his back. His fur rippled beneath my touch, tense and trembling. I hadn't seen him like this since the night of the thunderstorm. "What happened?" I whispered. She looked down at him. I think he remembered it hit me. Then this wasn't just a field to him. This was the field, the place where he'd been left, the place where no voice called him back, and yet he came back here on his own with us. I pulled Ellie close and whispered, "Tell him it's over. Tell him he's not alone anymore." She rested her forehead on his and said, quiet and sure, "You're not alone, Rowan. Not ever again." He let out a long, low breath, then laid his head in her lap. We stayed like that for a long time. No words, just the rustle of sunflower leaves and the slow, steady